surely people won't pay me for this. Like, what was that journey like as you were, growing up? Did you always, well, I guess you didn't always consider going into some kind of creative field or pursuing that if you were thinking about going into other things that were maybe more stable or whatever. Yeah, just share a little bit about what that was like, knowing at such a young age things you're interested in, but still wondering if it could be a viable option for your future,
Yeah, that's really interesting the way you're phrasing that. I hadn't actually thought about it like this before, but I do think that somewhere I was like, oh, this is too fun for this to be like a thing that I should be doing.
Yeah, surely people won't pay me for this.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm like, okay, it just didn't make sense. I was doing this in my spare time and it was just fun for me. And I knew like growing up, I was good at a fair amount of things. I was like, I guess broadly, I don't know if you would say successful, but like broadly like average in most subjects or whatever in school. Yeah, I definitely spent a few years like what at the time I think was my dream. Like I wasn't thinking about doing art and that being like sort of a dream realized or anything like that. Like, oh, I love doing this stuff. I wonder if I can make it a career. I guess that's not what I'm going to do. And I'll just go and fall back on the things that I kind of feel like I'm good at. And I was like, maybe we'll see what happens. I don't know. Maybe I'll end up doing something else. I didn't have like a specific vision of like, I'm going to be a designer professionally. I was just like, I'm going to go learn communication theory and then see where that takes me.
Cool. So a few different decisions along the way or a different result on an exam, and you might have been working in a pharmacy somewhere or a doctor or...
Yeah, who knows?
I believe we should pay more attention to our childhood dreams. For instance, I wanted to be a Chinese restaurant owner and a video game designer when I grew up. And as it turns out, I still love video games and Chinese food. Well, when I was tracing drawings of Dragonball Z characters on printer paper, Kyle Barrett was listening to his dad's CD collection, studying liner notes and letterforms, and drafting logos at age 4. Years later, it should be no surprise that Kyle was the first designer ever hired at Whiteboard, and he became a longtime creative partner to Ryan O'Neal of Sleeping at Last, a prolific songwriter and one of Kyle's favorite musicians. Kyle is the son of a draftsman and a freelance copywriter. He's a drummer, a designer, and an entrepreneur. In all his life, he's bucked the pressure to specialize in one thing or fit into neat categories, and that's made all the difference. If you've ever felt the pressure to pick just one thing, then this conversation's for you. I'm Nick Blackman, and this is Final. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. It's always funny saying things like on the show today, as though this is live. It's going to get edited. This might not come out for a few weeks. Why even say that?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm so glad to have you join. I feel like, we're still getting to know each other. We were just chatting a bunch about that right before this. And I feel like when you do this little intro for yourself, I'm going to learn a lot about you. So I'm really interested to hear how you would introduce yourself. I'll maybe just say, I know Kyle because we both worked. I still work at Whiteboard, but Kyle worked at Whiteboard in the early days of the agency, which will be fun to chat about. And we were realizing there's probably a lot that's really similar still and probably a lot that's very different.
Yeah.
And so Kyle and I have kind of gotten to know each other through that, but also music, which will be an interesting kind of overlap that we'll chat about later, I'm sure. But yeah, Kyle, for people that don't know you, why don't you share a little bit about yourself and just feel free to take that wherever you want to.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm stoked to do this. And I also don't really like talking about myself all that much, so we'll give this a go. But yeah, I'm Kyle. I have been in the design world for officially, professionally now, about 13 years. And Nick is right. I recently found out, I did not know this. I just was sort of shooting the breeze with Eric at May Day a couple months ago. And he's like, hey, you're actually the first employee of Whiteboard. And I was like, no, sorry, that's not true, because Jonathan Cottrell is who I knew. For anybody that doesn't know him, he's an incredible developer and technologist. And we overlapped at Lee by a couple of years and spent a lot of time in the communications department together. And he is who introduced me to Eric and Taylor. And one thing led to another. I ended up having an internship that I did through school with them. And then they were like, hey, do you want to actually join our team? So I worked at Whiteboard in the first like official year and a half or so of its existence, which I was saying to you, I was like, I bet that it seems like things are so different. Like there's so many more people that work here and stuff like that. And you were like, yeah, it's probably a lot the same. But
nothing changes.
Yeah. I was going to say that feels like oddly reassuring in some ways and also like surprising in others. So, but yeah, I got my start creatively. I don't know how far back you want to go with stuff, but
we're going to go all the way back.
All right. I'm here for it. So yeah, I started like noticing letter forms at a pretty young age, which I think was the thing that sort of led me into being interested in design initially. My dad is a musician. Really, everybody in my family is a musician, but he had a pretty hefty CD collection going by the time I was in elementary school. And so my like upbringing, I would spend a whole lot of time just like poring over the liners of CDs as I would listen to music. And that was like my idea of a good time as
a kid. That.
It was super fun, honestly. And
like what age are we talking?
We're talking like, as far as my memory goes back, probably like, I don't know. I remember stuff at like age like 4 or 5. Like, and I know that maybe is weird to like to be like, oh, I can pull memory of that, but there were some very specific things that stood out. And I remember like it was our laundry room that had these shelves with all these CDs on it. And I would just go pull out like a stack of them and sit at the boombox with headphones on and just like flip through and like read all of the like thank yous and the like liner notes and stuff like that. And I think that's honestly where my fascination with type came from, even though there was nothing that was really inherently like impressive about the way that the type looked in any of these records that I was looking at. Just the sheer fact that they could fit all of that information into the liners was like somehow fascinating to me. And that grew over time. My dad was a draftsman. He went to school for drafting, and he is sort of like tangential to that now. And so he had like a bunch of like pre-digital design tools from his school years, kind of just around. And I would like just sort of rifle through these boxes of his stuff in the garage occasionally when I would be in there. And I actually have a book that I think it's over here on my shelf, that was a Letraset graphic handbook that was like part of his like stuff or whatever. And that's like the one thing I kept from all of that. But it's basically just like, I don't know how much you know about Letraset, but it was like a pre-computer typesetting. You could like buy these contact letters or whatever, and you could like lay out, the title of an album or whatever with these little contact letters. So yeah, I was like super interested in that kind of stuff. And that quickly grew into like wanting to trace logos that I liked. So I would just like print stuff off super low res from the internet and like sort of just do like a transfer and try to like understand how these logos were put together. And it wasn't until I was like, I think I was probably in high school that I even considered like digital stuff all that much. My family had like a little 3 megapixel point and shoot camera at that time, which felt like good enough, for the moment. Yeah. And so I would use that. And I had this like, I want to say it was like Photoshop Express or something like that. I don't even know. I could not tell you what version any of this stuff was, but I would take photos with this camera and then I would like run them through Photoshop Express and like do all kinds of effects to them. And then I would print them on t-shirt transfers and I would like iron on and make my own t-shirts. And that was like, I would say where I officially like put together all of the things that I had kind of been doodling with in my younger years. And then I like sort of added the power of the computer or whatever to that. So when it came time for me to actually like decide what I wanted to do with school, I had a pretty circuitous route. I had a minute where I was like, I'm going to do pharmacy. I was like really interested in science and stuff like that. But then I ended up visiting Lee University in Cleveland, which is where I found out that you spent some of your college years. Did not know that until today. And where Eric and Taylor and Jonathan all went to school. And that was where I kind of decided to put all of those things together. At the time, there was no like graphic design major. So I sort of pieced together what I could at the time from the communications major. There was like you could have an emphasis, and I chose advertising because it was the track that gave me like InDesign, Photoshop, Illustrator, like actual hands-on classes in the software. But I ended up taking that a lot further. Like those classes were super helpful, but I spent a ton of time just like teaching myself on my own time outside of that. And so I often will say, like, I don't really have like a traditional design education. There was a guy that used to work at Whiteboard who you probably crossed over with, Taylor Dolan, years ago. And he started as an intern while I was there. And we used to talk a lot about how because I think he went to the University of North Texas, and he had like a very traditional art school kind of experience there, learning like how to do hundreds of iterations on the same logo. And I'd never had that. I just was like, there's no draft, there's only the final or whatever kind of approach of doing things, having had, a very commercial sort of like upbringing in the industry. So we would talk about that a lot. And I often compared it in the sense that, what I feel like I got was a very like hands-on kind of education. And, I owe a lot to Eric and Taylor for bringing me along in the early years, and really that being kind of where I learned how to actually do some of the stuff that I can do now. So yeah, that kind of,
wow.
That's all the like sort of background context there.
That was a fascinating ride. I have so many questions. So at 4, you were like looking at typesettings and stuff, and you were like already intrigued at that age, and you were drafting logos where I might have been printing things like anime pictures and tracing them. You were drawing logos.
Yeah.
That's great. And then you considered, maybe I'll go into pharmaceuticals or like a better career or something. I don't know what you might have been thinking, even though you already at such an early age were passionate and interested in these types of like really specific design areas. Like what was that journey like as you were, growing up? Did you always, I guess you didn't always consider going into some kind of creative field or pursuing that if you were thinking about going into other things that were maybe more stable or whatever. Just share a little bit about what that was like, knowing at such a young age things you're interested in, but still wondering if it could be a viable option for your future,
Yeah, that's really interesting the way you're phrasing that. I hadn't actually thought about it like this before, but I do think that somewhere I was like, oh, this is too fun for this to be like a thing that I should be doing.
Yeah, surely people won't pay me for this.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm like, okay, it just didn't make sense. I was doing this in my spare time, and it was just fun for me. And I knew like growing up, I was good at a fair amount of things. I was like, I guess broadly, I don't know if you would say successful, but like broadly like average in most subjects or whatever in school. But yeah, I definitely spent a few years like what at the time I think was my dream. Like I wasn't thinking about doing art and that being like sort of a dream realized or anything like that. Like, oh, I love doing this stuff. I wonder if I can make it a career. I did that with music a bunch. I was like, oh, what it would be like to like be in a touring band, like, or could I like do music professionally or whatever? And then the pharmacy thing was just kind of like I had like a spike of interest. I want to say I was like a sophomore in high school, and I took chemistry and really enjoyed like some very specific aspects of it, like way more than I had previously. And so I was like, oh, maybe this is like worth pursuing. And really the story there is that I was very close to like changing my mind entirely. Like I had looked at a bunch of different schools, communications programs and art programs, and was like kind of thinking about that. But I had visited UNC Chapel Hill, actually. I'm from North Carolina. And so like, it's a big deal to like go to a state school there. It's kind of hard to get into UNC on a number of different levels. But I went and visited, and I was like, oh man, I would love to do pharmacy here. I was like almost 100% decided, like if I get in here, I'm going to do that. And interestingly enough, like, I don't know what going to school was like for you, but like I was part of a program where it's like you apply to a whole bunch of different schools. You have like your safety schools and all that kind of thing. UNC and Wake Forest were reaches for me growing up. And I was going to do communications at Wake Forest for a minute. Long story short, I got into Wake. It was very, very expensive, and we could not afford to send me there at the time, my family. And UNC would have been within reach, but I did not make it into the program. So after visiting Lee, I was like, okay, well, this is kind of like the best of both worlds. And at the time, the idea of going to a Christian school like also seemed kind of appealing. And so it's funny, like I would have none of the same connections that I have now if not for that. But yeah, that's kind of how I ended up there. I just saw the like, oh, I didn't get to UNC. I don't want to I wouldn't want to do pharmacy anywhere else. there wasn't a comparable program that I was interested in. So I was just like, I guess that's not what I'm going to do. And I'll just go and fall back on the things that I kind of feel like I'm good at. And I was like, maybe we'll see what happens. I don't know. Maybe I'll end up doing something else. I didn't have like a specific vision of like, I'm going to be a designer professionally. I was just like, I'm going to go learn communication theory and then see where that takes me. So
cool. So a few different decisions along the way, or a different result on an exam, and you might have been in pharmaceutical, like working in a pharmacy somewhere, or a doctor, or
who knows? I mean, I still am very interested in the science side of things, and that comes to play. Like chemistry wise, I love like the chemistry of like coffee and stuff like that. So I get to like have fun with that occasionally. Yeah. But
it always comes back around to coffee.
It always does, indeed. Good coffee.
Well, thinking about how you said you were thinking, wow, would somebody actually pay me to draw or design logos or any number of those things? When did you start to realize, man, I actually might be able to make a living pursuing this? Like, this feels like something that I could make work. Did that happen in school, or did it happen like after school, or maybe when you first started at Whiteboard? Like, what was that journey like?
I think it did happen at some point in school, and I couldn't place this exactly where this happened, like in my time at Lee. But I started working for so there are a couple of like venues on campus. For anybody that doesn't, you probably wouldn't know this about Lee, but you would know this. The Con Center, which hosts like the main chapel and a bunch of like concerts and stuff like that. They hired me, I think about 2 years into my time at Lee, and I started working on like event posters and stuff like that for them. I had had a couple of moments of success in class where like I'd gotten really good feedback on things from professors, and that had given me enough, I guess, confidence at that point to apply for that job. And so I think that was like more or less when I realized like, oh, like I could do this, like I could do assignments essentially for them as like sort of as a client and get paid for it. I mean, it was a campus job, so it didn't pay very much, but because of what I did there, and because that increased the visibility of like what I was doing to other people on campus, there were a couple of other departments that just hired me freelance, which I never remembered like how that actually went down. But there was some department that was like, hey, we want you to like brand this other chapel series that we're going to start. And there was some other some promotional cards or something like that. It was like a very small project that they paid me outside of the like school structure to do. And so I was still a student, and I was like, I guess I can they just approached me. Like I didn't look for that. And so I was like, oh, maybe people do want to like pay me to do stuff like this, like that. That was kind of cool. I also would mention that I guess there was something like looking back, there was something kind of like rooted in there in the sense that my mom had spent a few years, she had a couple of corporate jobs. She's a writer by trade and a really good one. And she had spent a lot of years in a corporation. And then when my brother was born, she decided to like be at home for like the better part of a decade with us and like just sort of, watch us and do a lot of like stay at home stuff, but she freelanced pretty solidly that whole time. And so like I was like in the house, like watching her do that. And I was like, oh, I guess you can like make money from random people. To my knowledge at the time, like random people like just writing for them or doing like creative things like that. And so I guess somewhere in there, I had like a bent toward like, okay, maybe like there is like a path here or whatever.
Cool. Yeah. So your dad was a draftsman, and your mom was a freelance like copywriter. Is that right?
Yeah, she did a lot of copywriting. She's done a bunch of other things too. She's ghostwritten books and other stuff like that. So
did them kind of having these trades and creative adjacent or creative careers play a role in encouraging you towards, realizing I've got a skill here that's worth investing in? Or did they like make time for you even as a young kid to like spend your time and energy on drawing or get you supplies or, just do little things even to encourage that growth?
Yeah, they definitely did. My dad, I think, was very excited that I like really loved like drawing materials, like, supplies or whatever. He had a ton of stuff left over from his years in college. And so I used a lot of that. And yeah, I do feel like for the most part, my parents did a really good job of fostering things that they saw as strengths for both my brother and myself. And I really am so deeply grateful to them for that, because I think they saw a lot of stuff that, we saw it from a perspective that I, of course, wouldn't have seen it from. I'm like, oh yeah, I think this is fun. But I was like into all kinds of other stuff. Like I loved playing video games. And I think I remember them encouraging me to spend, less time playing video games and like more time like drawing or playing outside or something like that, growing up. And, so there was a little bit there. I'm thankful in that, like, I tried a bunch of different things and they just sort of like observed like, oh, okay, Kyle's good at art related things. We'll get him art supplies. I would get those kinds of things like as gifts when I was growing up. And then they saw the music stuff too. And that was like, I guess, two sides of the coin for them. They're like, okay, we're going to try to support these two things as much as we can see to or whatever. Everything short of like me going to any kind of like official, I never went to like an art camp or anything. I actually went to a science camp one year. So I think that has a place somewhere in those stories too.
It's cool. Was there a point when you started realizing that maybe design or even music might, like when it stopped feeling like a bit of a hobby and maybe started to feel a little bit bigger?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely by the time I was rolling around the first semester of my junior year at Lee, in the structure of the department there at that time, you had to graduate with like 50 internship hours. And so I was like actively looking for, okay, I'm going to graduate with this degree. I haven't changed it. So I'm like, for the time being, looking for jobs that are related to this. And I think it was really pivotal. I don't know if Jonathan will listen to this, but like he was a really pivotal voice for me. And that like he would show me stuff and we would just like talk about design and like what software could do a lot while we were in school. And he also had like the music connections as well. He's a musician. And so we like would kind of like talk all these crossover things. And I think being around people like him really like helped me to see like, okay, he's like going after this. Maybe it's worth like going after this. Like maybe I'm good enough to do this. I think I had a sense that I was like good enough at it at the time to, see some success in what I was doing in school. And it was like, I think it was around the time where I had to decide like, okay, I've got to do the internship. Like I'm going to look for something that would fulfill that. And there's all kinds of ways you can go about doing that. I was looking in more traditional routes as well with like an ad agency and that kind of thing. But Jonathan was like, hey, let me pass your information on to Eric and Taylor. Like, I don't know if you've ever met them. They, overlapped with us for a little bit of time there. And he was like, they're doing this really cool thing. I think it would be like fun, like for you to be involved in it or whatever. And so I think it was around that time where I was like, okay, I'm looking for this stuff, but I didn't like really stick my neck out for that. So I'm like, okay, maybe like one thing you would find with me the more time you spend with me is that I historically have put a lot of stock in like, I don't always see the things that I'm good at, like for what they are, just sort of like as they exist. But I've often filtered that through like, okay, somebody else saw this thing in me and sort of like called it out a little bit. And that gave me confidence to be like, oh, I can like sort of step up into that. And I think that was the first time that happened kind of professionally, if you will. Not counting there's a couple of freelance projects I had done before. This was more like, oh, like I could go learn a lot from these people, which is funny because I think I had this perception that they were like years into the process, but they were not. So yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah. And I mean, I know music's played a big part of your journey as well. What's that been like trying to balance? Because I think I remember you mentioning that at one point you even thought, well, maybe music will become a thing, or you've wondered that recently, like, I could do some studio tracking and things like that. Like, what's that journey been like having multiple creative outlets that some people might just treat as hobbies that you're treating as things that you enjoy, but also as potential sources of income and growth in your career?
Yeah. I've almost always looked at them as like, again, like sort of two sides of the same coin. They really feed each other a lot. Yeah. There's definitely been moments where it's felt more like a hobby for sure. And it's interesting, I know we were talking about this recently about how this could be something that I'm like poised currently to do more of, but because I spent so many years wondering if that would be the creative endeavor that I would pour all of my time into, I really spent a lot more time learning about music growing up than I ever did about design. Design was just sort of like this thing that felt like fun for me to do.
Cool.
And that's great. Like I love looking back on that now because I certainly have surpassed my knowledge of music and design at this point in my life. I definitely was like, oh yeah, I'm pouring a lot of time. I like did the whole, played in all of the ensembles, like growing up in school, like took private lessons, like was definitely setting myself up for all of that. And it felt like it fed what I did creatively a lot because when I think about like the way that I approach design problems, generally speaking, I often am looking at things from the perspective of like, how can I sort of like compose this as a scene or like a phrase, like a musical phrase or something. For me, like I know lots of phrases are like this, like what I'm listening to really affects what's coming out of my hand, so to speak, like when I'm designing. And it definitely felt like it was like a thing that ran so close to it for all of those years. And I don't think it was until like probably after I left Whiteboard, I'd been in business for myself for a few years when I was like, I'd started playing. I've always played on worship teams, like at churches that I've attended. That's always been like a thing I've tried to keep going just so that I have an outlet for playing music. And I think I had the opportunity a few years back to start tracking for the church that I was part of here in a different part of the city. And that gave me a lot of confidence because I'd never done professional drum tracking. Like at that point, I'm like, okay, this is a thing. This is one of those things that I like always wanted to do, but I never had an opportunity to do it. And when I did, it was like, oh, okay, like I'm actually decently good at this too. Like this feels cool and bolstering and like I want to do this more. And it really wasn't until we moved back here last year that I started to think about, my wife and I spent a few years in Indiana and I played music there too, but it wasn't until I knew that we were going to come back here that I was like, okay, I'm going to be connected to a lot of the network that I have there. Maybe there's like a way that I could sort of get involved in helping other people make their music and I could just sort of sit in and play for them or whatever. So that's kind of where I'm at with it right now in terms of like thought behind it. But it's a very little thought at the moment in terms of like, I haven't gone super deep into it yet. So
that's cool. Well, and it's interesting hearing you share about your journey with things because, you mentioned the con center work and doing these concert posters and things like that is like some of the first work that you did. So it's really interesting how even your very first kind of creative commissioned projects have had an overlap with
that's definitely true
with music.
Yeah. And as you're saying that, I'm like realizing I think that I probably wanted it to be that way and I just wasn't sure how to do it. So I was like, okay, any opportunity I have to work on something like that, like it always was just easier to conceptualize something that I was designing if it had to do with music. I don't know. That was something I don't think I was aware of at the time, but even like looking back to the things that inspired me as a kid, like it was like very almost inextricably tied. Like my music taste and my design taste run very close together. Maybe that's not like the best thing as a designer, but like I love sitting into that when it makes sense to. I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't mind being like, I grew up like a hardcore and punk kid. And so like that bleeds a little bit into what I do. I'm like, yeah, I want this to have like just a little bit of tooth, a little bit of edge or whatever. And I don't know how often I'm like deciding to do that, but like that's somewhere that is running under the surface.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, you know your audience because you are your audience.
Exactly. Yeah. For sure. Yeah.
Which I obviously want to get into, talking a little bit about Sleeping at Last and you ending up working with Ryan O'Neal and stuff. But before we get to that, I also want to just talk about what was it like going from working at Whiteboard in an agency to starting your own freelance creative practice? Like, what was that transition like? How did you even make that leap? How did you feel about making that leap initially? Yeah.
Man, that's a good question. There's a lot of emotion tied up in that. Yeah, it was on the one hand, I was like, okay, I can do this because I saw my mom freelancing. I think that was like for sure in the back of my head. And I always sort of held that in my back pocket when I left school because I was thinking, if nothing else, I can just freelance. I can probably find people that would want to work with me or whatever, even on little stuff. So that helped a little bit. But yeah, the transition from Whiteboard to that, like I have to throw a whole lot of thanks toward Eric and Taylor because when I decided to make that transition, they had a couple of there were a couple of clients that we had at the time at Whiteboard that they were like, hey, we're interested in sort of like diversifying some of these accounts that we have. You already have a relationship with some of these people. Would you like to just continue working with them? And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, that would be awesome. So I'm super indebted to them in the sense that I didn't really have to look for clients at the beginning. I was able to take a couple of those existing relationships, and I'm sure if I looked at it really closely, pretty much everybody's like some degree of separation from those initial clients. Some of them I worked with for like the first 5 years of my business, and that was really awesome. So yeah, I say that to say, like, I know it's not always like set up that easily for somebody to just make the leap, but at the time I really felt like they believed in what my ability was at that stage. And, looking back, I'm like surprised because I was an okay designer then, but I'm like a much better designer now. But I think that all of that together and just, I think by way of like knowing that connections were the biggest thing and remaining as connected as I did for those few years after I left really helped a lot. And it also like helped for me to sort of like on the outside see like, okay, they're just trying to figure this out too. And like, they were sort of available for questions about stuff. I remember Taylor offering some really good advice at one point. Very early on, I emailed him about something and he was like, it was as simple as like, hey, your email is still like at Gmail. Like you probably should like put this in the domain or something. And that was like the first year. And I was like, oh yeah, duh. Like that's a really logical thing. I just hadn't done it yet. And he like helped me get that set up and stuff. And so that was really cool. Like I really felt supported in that sense, but it was emotionally very weird because aside from that, that was the first time in my life I had just been like in a place where I was going to sort of make it work on my own without having the padding of a team. Even though the team was only like 5 or 6 people deep at that time, it still felt different to not get up and like go work with those people every day. And at that time, it was sort of an inflection point because I actually got a lot more involved in the church that I was at. And I spent a few years like serving with like the youth ministry there. And that really expanded my horizon a bunch in terms of like seeing myself as a leader and like how that could like even tie in creatively to what I was doing. And it also gave me like a springboard into doing a lot more music stuff because I kind of like left because I wanted to do more specific things, left Whiteboard, that is, because I wanted to do more specific things and do as much work with artists as I could. And I kind of like threw myself into the connections I had in local music and stuff like that, which really, I think, sort of set up some of those other things, at least gave me the perspective that I needed, I guess. And I sort of naturally gravitated toward other people who had this like DIY ethic and came from a similar musical background and found a lot of community in that as well.
How did you decide which maybe you were just following your interests, which you kind of hinted at just then? Like, is that how you decided to really double down or pursue working with more artists? Or were you feeling pressure to specialize or niche down, as they say, or anything?
At that time, I definitely felt I still felt a lot of pressure to generalize. And that was actually something, and this is an interesting reflection from the time that I was at Whiteboard. I never was particularly good at imagining what a brand could look like on the web, especially at that time. I know technology's changed so significantly since I was there, which makes it so much easier to do that. But at the time, that was like my biggest roadblock. And so I was like, okay, just anything to not do that, basically. And I just wanted to avoid that, which is funny looking back because like I've certainly been involved with that over the years. It never was like a specialty. I think I felt pressure at that time to like generalize and just sort of like leaning into the interest was like, I don't know if it was like a way of pushing back against that. I think again, somewhere in there, 5 or 10-year-old me was like, yeah, but could I like do album packaging? That's the thing that I loved the most, like that was the thing that inspired me. And I think it was just a desire to maybe walk out something that just was really meant a lot to me. And at the time I was like, if I could just do this one time, like, and be like, I designed that album's like packaging because I had done it in school, but like for a real artist, that was actually out there. I think that would have felt like a cool, like kind of full circle thing. And at that time I was like starting to get into like, okay, this just feels like a reach. This feels like a dream thing or whatever. Funny looking back because it totally was within reach at the time. I just was like, I really want to do this for people that like have a have some kind of an effect in the world or whatever. So yeah, I think it was a little bit of both of those things. It was like this, like pushing back against the generalizing, and also like I had this like stored away dream of like just closing that loop creatively or something.
I was saying, you're sharing how you had this dream of doing album art.
Yeah.
And I just think that's so full circle, which is what I think you were kind of getting at.
Exactly.
Too. Like,
yes.
You're saying it for seeing your dad's CD collection and being inspired by the typography and designs and all of these different things. So it's really cool to see that come full circle and become a thing that you actually are like, no, I want to pursue this and specialize, especially when, like you're saying, there is pressure, I feel like, to generalize or for designers to do lots of different trades or disciplines in design versus just being able to pursue your whimsy a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good thing overall in the industry. I know there's a lot of talk right now. Like I can't tell you how many posts I've seen on LinkedIn that are like, a graphic designer is this, not like this huge list of other stuff or whatever. And I think at one time I definitely was like, yeah, like I agree with that. I see a lot of value at this point in generalists. And I think that that's great because I think some of the best like strategists and like business owners are that way, which is cool. Like I've gotten to know some people that are more like that over the years. And I think in some ways, like I just wanted to specialize because I liked getting like super zoomed in on one thing at a time. And for the most part, that's kind of how I built my business in the sense that I work with fewer clients than I used to. And I try to like focus on, a bigger problem, but for a longer period of time or whatever.
So what you mentioned, like doing some work for your church led to getting to work with more musicians and stuff, but that you also were really trying to focus there and kind of leverage some of your relationships that you have with local musicians. What got you started there, and what was the transition to end up working with Sleeping at Last for such a long period of time?
Man, that's really fun to look back at. Because I can very much see a thread now that I don't think I noticed at the time. Yeah, the church that I was part of here at the time was, and they're actually, this is true of a lot of churches, I think, in this area, because we're close enough to Nashville, and like there's a lot of like sort of like spillover in the industry and stuff like that. But I became friends with a guy named AJ Cheek when I was at City Church here, and he was part of the worship team. And it's a season when I was not playing music really much at all. And I just sort of became friends with him. I don't even remember how. Just kind of like ended up hanging out. Like we went to Chili's one time and just talked about music or something. And
Chili's.
Yeah, I truly can't tell you. Like I don't remember the last time I've been there, but I remember this particular dinner with him. And he was like, "Hey, I'm working on some new music." He had been writing some of his own stuff. He was part of a band, sort of like a pop punk band called Nevertheless that was popular years ago. And he was like, "I'm writing my own music now. I'm like just some of this other stuff." And he's like, "I've released this EP. I heard that you like have like some art experience and stuff. I want to do a different version of the art for the physical packaging," which at the time I was like, "Oh, that's such a cool idea." Like I love when people do stuff like that, harkening back to like the days when there would be like multiple versions of the same album cover that people would try to like collect or whatever. And so at the time he was like, "Hey, like I'm doing this, like, do you want to be involved?" Basically. And again, it was just sort of like a connection thing. Like I wasn't specifically like, "Hey, can I please work on your stuff?" It was like, "Hey, I've noticed your stuff around church or whatever. Like, do you want to work on this?" And so that project was the first like real thing I ever did, I think. And it dovetailed a little bit with like, I think I actually was working at Whiteboard at the time. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there was some stuff there. I actually was working on some packaging for one of their clients. Funny enough, they did stuff like that for a very short time at the very beginning. But yeah, this project with AJ. Yeah, there's a worship artist named Ricardo Sanchez who was like big in the Church of God circles, and Taylor had done the album cover and I ended up doing like the rest of the packaging.
Taylor Dolan or Taylor Jones?
Sorry, Jones. Taylor Jones did it.
No way.
I'm sure I could dig it out somewhere. I think I have a copy of it somewhere in storage, but
please find.
I will. I'll bring it in. That's the kind of thing I think that like Eric would keep on a shelf just for fun. Like
Yes.
he does stuff like that. So I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, it was some crossover between both of those. The one with Whiteboard, I didn't have any like direct connection to that artist, but AJ was my friend, and so I was like, oh, this is cool. Long story short, he ended up continuing his career. He's still making music. I'm not involved with any of what he does visually anymore, but I helped him with a bunch of stuff there at the beginning of his sort of like foray into solo work or whatever. And because I did that project and I got paid for it, and I think I actually entered it and like won like an Addy for it or something, because that felt like an important thing at one time in my world. Looking back, I'm not sure how, because it's not that good. But anyway, that gave me a lot of confidence, and so I was like, okay, now I'm going to like actually ask people. Like I didn't ask for this, but I'm going to like try to just be adjacent to some conversations, and by proximity, see if I can like do this. Interestingly, that there's not like a specific thread between AJ and Ryan, but because at that point I was like really primed to keeping up with artists. It was funny, like Sleeping at Last had started this email newsletter when I was 13. I mean, probably before that, but I got to see them open for Switchfoot back in the day. This is the Beautiful Letdown tour, and they opened for them in 2003 at this little place in North Carolina, and I was so like into the way they sounded, and they sounded a lot more like U2 or something at that time. It was a 3-piece band, and my dad and I talked to them after the show for a little bit, and they were so nice. And I just remember that sticking out to me so much at the time, that I was like, yeah, I want to be connected. I want to like keep up with what this band is doing. And so I subscribed to their email list as a 13-year-old and just like kept up with them. And it was truly, I think to this day, is the newsletter I've probably been subscribed to the longest. And it was just really cool because Ryan would like write the emails himself. And he just sort of talk about like what he was doing and things he was interested in. And so I followed the journey from them being a full band to just being him, the other couple guys sort of sitting in, and then him building like this whole world of other artists around him. And so I knew that he worked with like painters for all of his main sort of content or whatever. He has like these different streams of like concept music that he works on. And I think it was like probably 2014. So I'd been out of Whiteboard for like almost a year at this point, and still working in the city and connected with them and everything. But Ryan put out a call on his newsletter for designers. Like he was like looking for like an intern. And I was like, well, I'm not like an intern, like experience anymore. Like, but I would love to like see where this goes. And so this is one of the few things where I like actually sort of applied to this thing. And I emailed the address that he said to email, and it ended up being his mom. So his mom was his manager, and was up until her passing a few years ago. She was really lovely, like such a lovely person. And so she was the one that processed all of these applications. And she was like, okay, Ryan wants to like have you answer this questionnaire. And it was like the coolest questionnaire. It was like, what kind of music are you listening to? Like, tell me about like your art interests and all this stuff. And I was like, just so jazzed that I'm like, somebody I look up to in the music world is going to read this. And I've been a fan for, the better part of 10 years at that point. And so I sort of stuck my neck out on that. And Ryan ended up emailing me, and he was like, hey, we want to like try you out on this project. We would love the opportunity to do some stuff or whatever. And he knew like, not like an intern level experience at this point, but he's like, I have these cover songs coming up. He's like, I'm working on them for Grey's Anatomy. I think was one of the shows. And at the time, I think something was going to be on the Carrie Diaries, which I never watched, but was like a short run Sex and the City adjacent show or something. Anyway, they had commissioned him to do covers of pop songs. And he was like, this is my test project. He was like, this part of the application process for me to like be on his team. He was like, hey, can you do some comps for this cover? And I was like, yeah, totally. And so I did a few, and he hit me back like pretty immediately. He was like, oh, I love this. We want to just run with it. Are you good to just like be part of the team? I was like, yeah, that's cool. I don't know what this means, but
That's awesome.
there was promise at that time of like being involved in other kinds of music projects. But what ended up happening is that I spent like the first couple of years that I worked with him, we did a bunch of those single covers. And then he also had me set up like packaging. So I got to fulfill like my real dreams of like making like vinyl packaging. So the first like official production stuff I ever did for an artist was with him, which feels like crazy to look back on now. I'm like, could have definitely like warmed up with somebody else, I think. But instead of jumping straight into somebody who had as much of a fan base as him at the time. And this was like all on the heels of like Turning Page being in the Twilight soundtrack. And so he was like exploding at that moment in popularity. And these cover songs sort of like were bringing that popularity to even more people. And that was really cool. But yeah, I worked on the first year of Atlas. He had been working with a different visual artist to paint all the covers, which is so cool, like to get to work with, that's not a medium I ever spent any time in as an artist. And it was just cool to like set up, lay out with these really beautiful paintings and stuff. And so there is a version of that. It's not something that you could easily find now because it's been repressed a few times since then with slightly more cohesive packaging than what I'd accomplished at the time. But it was really cool. It was like a fabric wrapped, foil stamped box, and got to do all the bells and whistles on this thing. And it was just super cool. And then I worked on what then became the like legacy project I worked on was all of the cover songs and then their accompanying compilations. And I got to lay out vinyl for each of those, which is a lot simpler. I did some other stuff in there too. There's a record called Many Beautiful Things that is a film soundtrack he did around that time. And I got to do packaging for that as well. Again, just working with somebody else's. Actually, I think it was the artist's paintings that the film was about. It was about this particular painter in history, and all the music was sort of based around her art or whatever. So it felt like a really cool intersection. I'm like, oh, not only is this music that I like, but also like it's beautiful art, and I get to like add type and do like design system kind of stuff to it as well.
That's so fun. I love hearing that story. You've had two jobs that both started as an intern.
I know, right?
Technically, which I can identify with. That's how I started at Whiteboard as well.
That's wonderful.
I'm curious for you to share a bit about just like, because obviously not all of your work has been done for a band that was like a childhood hero of yours.
Yeah.
What's it been like the rest of the time leading a creative practice and growing a business and all of these things, like the other clients that have made up that portfolio and the ups and downs of the past years?
Man, there are a lot of them for sure. It's funny, when I started, I sort of like was like, well, I can freelance. And because I was like, I knew I wanted to do something different when I left Whiteboard, but I was like, I'll just do this for now. And like for the longest time, that was what I did. I just sort of plugged in wherever it made sense. Did a lot of work sort of adjacent to Whiteboard and other people that were connected there for many years. And then that branched into stuff that I was doing with people related to my church and otherwise. And interesting, the Sleeping at Last work got me some like West Coast acclaim at the time. There was he's ended up being a really good friend of mine over the past 10 years. A guy named Matt Jones used to be the art director at Jesus Culture in Sacramento. And at that time, they were just like planting a church. They had made a lot of waves in the like worship music world for a number of years and had planted this church. And so he saw some of the Sleeping at Last work and reached out on Twitter at the time and was like, hey, this is really cool. Like, we'd love to work with you on some stuff. And so I ended up doing, ironically, I did like web design systems and other kinds of stuff for them for a few years, which is the thing I was like trying not to do.
You couldn't get away from it.
I couldn't get away from it. But I like, at that time, things had changed enough where I was like, oh, I could actually do this. Like, I never actually ended up coding them myself or anything. So yeah, it's been very circuitous in the sense that I was thinking about this actually listening to Chris Conley talk about some of this stuff, sort of the like meandering paths that things take. I'm sure if I like sat down, I could really draw threads between everything. And I know they're there because I really believe that God writes like a really cohesive story out of everything. But I definitely, it was not comfortable for the longest time. I'm really happy to say that like for the most part, I was able to scale things with my business sort of alongside whatever my living situation was. But it wasn't until I got married about 5 years ago that I really was like, okay, like, well, now what am I going to do? Because like the complexity just ratcheted up. And I don't really know if I can keep doing this just sort of like fly by the seat of my pants freelancing thing. Because I had spent a couple of years working at the church, the aforementioned church, in like production, like music related stuff, as well as doing design things for them. And I was like kind of toying with the idea of going back in house somewhere. And then the pandemic hit. And of course that like changed things for lots of people across the industry. And I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to like dig in. We were in Indiana and I decided to really like go after what I always wanted to do, which was to do like brand strategy and like full like system build out kind of stuff and like do a few big projects a year or whatever. And so I hired a business coach because I did not feel like I was equipped to make that change by myself. And that was like a super, super helpful thing. If anybody has ever wondered whether or not it's worth it to work with somebody else, it 100% is. I was able to make the transition between like, oh yeah, I think I'll charge this for this project or whatever, to like, okay, I'm going to actually charge what this is worth and like really assess the value with the client. And so I feel relatively recent in my experience now for like being like a real design business. Like I did it, I paid taxes under the business name for lots of years, but I didn't really actually have like an LLC or anything like that until about 5 years ago. And so this is, where I'm at now, 5 years in, like trying to figure out what it looks like to do that. Interestingly, I had a lot of years where I like sunk a lot of time into existing client relationships because it's always easier to like kind of keep somebody who sort of like the known entities like on your roster. And I had a decently large shift happen this year with that has me like thinking, wow, I'm really good at like being loyal to like one main client or whatever at a time. What does it look like for me to sort of like diversify that? So interestingly, in all of those ups and downs, like I toyed with the idea of having, like part-time employment at the church and I'm going to do freelance on the side or whatever. And to like, okay, I'm doing this full time, to now I'm also sort of considering like, maybe I'm going to be doing something else part-time, like sort of alongside this in the transition here. Because I know a lot of things have changed this year and I keep hearing people in my world sort of talk about how much it's shifted like their focus and that kind of thing. So I don't know if that actually really answers that question now that I round the corner on it, but yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, and we talked a bit about the idea of like the portfolio career, or a friend of mine calls it his career garden.
I love that.
And he's like growing different things in different seasons that all kind of build and, or a portfolio of different streams of revenue and stuff, which it feels like that's kind of where you're headed now. How are you thinking about that? And like, the changing creative landscape and economy and running a business and all of those things, like how's that shaping up in like your actual day-to-day and the things you're pursuing right now?
Right now, my day-to-day looks very little like what it did about a year ago, which is interesting. Like I am currently spending a lot less time in creative practice, which is actually something I was talking with my wife about this past week. I'm like, oh, I really need to make sure that I like, even if I don't have active work, like I need to be doing the stuff to like stretch my creative muscles or whatever. I've been going into project mode a lot with we purchased a house here in town. And so I've been doing a lot of work on different things in that. We launched an Airbnb in our basement a month and a half ago, which was a dream that we had, like moving, like part of our dream sort of being back in this area or whatever, and starting like a little bit of like a real estate portfolio with that. We're starting very cautiously and house hacking or whatever. And I love what your friend said, like calling it a career garden. I really do like believe a lot in like the idea of like cultivating space, cultivating time or whatever for different things. As this landscape is changing, like economically and everything this year, and even with like AI being a big part of the conversation, I'm like, okay, really assessing like, what is it that I do sort of that AI can't do? I know everybody's sort of asking that question, but it's like, okay, like what is most human about what I'm doing? And how can I keep doing that? And is that like a thing I want to, like, as it pertains to my business, is that something I want to like go further into, or is it time for me to consider like taking a little bit of a pause from this pursuit and like just joining up with some other people who have some other trajectory for a little while. I'm kind of like considering what it looks like to have my toes in a bunch of things right now, because it does feel like that kind of is necessary. I've even thought about like getting work that is not specifically related to the design world, because I've never actually spent any time outside of it. I mean, I've sort of like spent time adjacent to it. Music has always felt adjacent, the production stuff. I'm really good friends with a lot of the people that have worked at Reverb over the years. And so I like have a lot of like, I guess, peer knowledge from spending a lot of time traveling. I mean, I've been to Africa with some of those people and designed in the back of a swampland in a little trailer and stuff like that. Just like really weird stuff. So I've been adjacent to these other worlds, and I'm like, all of this has been creative. Like maybe I should go do something with my hands. I don't really, something different, more like physical or whatever. So I'm even considering what that looks like at the moment. Just having something that is a little bit of a stopgap while I assess what the next like move is. I think I always want to be involved in design for sure, but I wonder, my wife and I are expecting our first child in the fall, and like that is posing a lot of questions to me of like, okay, well, what do the next like 5 years look like? What should I be doing? Like, is there something that the Lord is trying to speak to me right now about like my career trajectory that is going to like define that more? So all that to say, like, as far as cultivation goes, I'm like trying to listen as much as possible and just be like, and let go of control as much as possible, I guess, to see what that looks like.
Yeah. I mean, we said earlier that everything goes back to coffee. Just as you take a sip of coffee.
Exactly.
You gonna open up a coffee shop in town, or?
I mean, that would be amazing. I don't want to like write that off for sure, but I've heard that it's one of the most difficult things to do. So I'm like, I don't know if that's true or not, but like, yeah, I wouldn't mind like working in coffee a little bit. That would be kind of cool. I have thought about like, I could just go like try to pick up shifts at a local shop and just hang out and like see people, throughout the day. It'd be kind of fun to just be in the city that way too. I'm not counting anything out at this moment. We'll see. I've definitely wanted to do more coffee branding. I've just not had any I'm really bad about like doing spec work for the sake of just fun. And I'm trying to exercise that. So I'm like, okay, maybe I'll just like pick a coffee company like, S&W or something like that to do a little like rebrand for, because I'd love to do more work like that, like in coffee and like food and other packaging and that kind of stuff too. So
super cool. I would love for you to do that. And I'd love for you to open a coffee shop.
That's very kind of you. I appreciate it. You can come in like, if you want me to make a cup of coffee that takes 15 minutes, I can do that, because I have this whole ridiculous, it's not ridiculous.
Hey, that's probably the best coffee
process. Yeah. No, it's just,
well, as long as the brew time isn't 15 minutes, then maybe.
No, definitely. It's all prep so that it stays in that nice range,
Well, I'm curious, as maybe like last question, thinking about advice you've gotten along the way, thinking of somebody else that's maybe feeling pressure right now to pick one creative thing and just focus on that, or thinking about starting a creative practice of some kind and trying to make money doing that for the first time. What's like advice that you'd give as you're also trying to navigate this new landscape? I
think I'd say as much as possible to put yourself around other people who are doing some of those things that you're interested in. If I look back, at least on my journey thus far, like being in the same space as some of those people really like mattered a lot. And that's something that I'm sort of rediscovering right now. Even like after moving back, it took me a while to sort of reintegrate into some of the creative communities that I was part of years ago here. And I'm finding now that even when I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do long term, like just being around some of the people that I look up to or am peers with that are doing that really matters, and just like bolstering like some of that, and also seeing and being inspired by like what they're doing creatively. That's huge. I mean, you can look for inspiration endlessly online, and I really respect. I have some friends who are like incredible archivists of like design inspiration. It's never something that I've like had a desire to do. I'm like, oh yeah, let me just go like hang out with a bunch of people and just kind of like look over their shoulder essentially and see what it is that they're working on, because inevitably things about that are going to make it into what I'm doing. And I that's a big part of it, honestly. I think I also would say, because this is the thing I feel motivation to do in myself, is to just like make space for the things that matter. If it matters for you to get better at typesetting or at like, working with like a design system in an app or on the web or something like that, just find ways to do that. I guess, I'm not the best at doing that myself. I'll be the first to say, like, it's hard to sometimes like decide to do something that's not actually client work, because I'm like, without the promise of getting paid for this, am I going to actually care? It's a weird thing at this point in my career to look back and be like, oh, do I only do work when somebody's paying me? Like that's a strange thing to feel, because I used to not do that growing up. I think keeping like that childlike spirit is really important. And at least for me, like that has involved a lot of like leaning into like asking like how the Lord sees what I'm doing, and trying to like sit into that as much as possible and be like, okay, like there is something here. Like this is something that I was given. I have some amount of responsibility to steward this talent, or like this bent toward a certain way of thinking or whatever, because that is going to eventually like help and make the world a more whole place in some manner, even if I'm not like designing stuff for people. So I don't know. I feel like everything's connected in that. Like, people often say like exercise. I would also say exercise. My goodness, that's one thing I did not do. Seriously, like if you're creative, like doing things to move your body like bilaterally is huge. And like I did not realize that. I would just sit in front of the computer for uncountable hours and early on in my career. And I look back and I'm like, no wonder I felt like so stuck. It really helps to be like, okay, I'm doing 4 hours of deep work, and then I'm going to go like throw some heavy weights around, or like go on a run, or do something that like just blows all of the carbon out of the way you're thinking, so to speak, and can help you like arrive at better stuff when you come back. It's the, everything feeds into another spot of your life, or whatever kind of way of looking at things.
I love that. Yeah. My wife is like always encouraging me to get up, go walk outside, get some vitamin D, drink some water, touch some grass, all the things.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh, we could have a whole separate episode about all the like, the morning routines and that kind of stuff that really help to get into flow and all that. But yeah, it's real. It does actually help.
Yeah, that might be the next episode.
All right, let's do it.
Well, Kyle, thanks so much for talking with me. This has been really fun. I feel like I could ask you a million more questions, such as creative process and things like that, which we never really even had a chance to get into, because you've had such a storied career so far. But yeah, thanks for your time. It's been really fun chatting with you. And maybe we will have to have a second episode.
I mean, I'd love it. But yes, thank you so much for making space. This has been super fun, and it's been awesome talking with you today.
Awesome. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. You can subscribe on all of the usual suspects, and I hope to catch you on the next one. But in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Wherever you are in your life and your work, I'm cheering you on.